Good morning everyone, and thank you for being here. We're excited to be discussing with you our team project today. It was sustainability in equestrian sports, and our client was the Federation Equestrian International. My name is Megan Tidbury, this is Samesh Dutt, and Lee Davis is joining us from Canada. He's on Skype and you'll see him afterwards. We're going to start with Lee's presentation, which has been pre-recorded. He's going to discuss what sustainability is and what the project was. Then I'm going to take over and discuss our project objectives, what we did and how we did it. And then Samesh, who's actually continuing the work in an internship at the FEI, is going to discuss our recommendations and where the FEI is headed from here. So thank you, and we'll start with Lee's presentation.
When we first met Dr. Harold Mueller, the Executive Director for Education and Standards with the International Federation of Equestrian Sport, the FEI, he sat us down to discuss his vision, his ideas on sustainability and equestrian sport. And in particular, he made mention that there's a growing trend for these larger scale events, mega events, multi-sport events, World Games events, to develop sustainability initiatives. And this is a big push because local and federal governments, the public, and sponsors are demanding this type of policy. Equestrian sport has, just like other large-scale sports, has an impact, a negative impact on the local environment, and then the transportation that takes place for the spectators, the participants, and the horses globally truly have a detrimental effect on the environment, and we should start looking at initiatives that help improve on this. So we went out to look at the sustainability and what does it really mean. And we found three large pillars of sustainability, three fundamentals: environmental sustainability, social sustainability, and economic sustainability. Environmental sustainability is the concept that an event organizer should make plans and recommendations in order to minimize the wasting of resources like water, energy, and raw material, and to limit the negative impact of the event on the local and global environment. Social responsibility refers to the preservation of the current social resources being used for an event and enabling equal or greater social properties to become available for future generations. And finally, economic sustainability refers to the fact that event organizers should plan to create an event that can remain economically viable for the present and for the future. Then when we returned with this knowledge base back to the FEI and spoke to Dr. Mueller, we really spoke about the vision for our particular project and what was its mandate. And we decided that the project team would identify and research environmental standards with respect to event organization and to project these standards on equestrian sport. It was also important for the team to look for horse-specific sustainability initiatives that could be implemented to make equestrian sport a greener sport. So we went out again, back looking in the literature and looking for the most up-to-date international standards for environmental sustainability. And one of the major ones that we focused on was the ISO 2012-1. This was an international standard that was developed out of the initiatives, or for the initiatives, for the London 2012 London Olympics. We also researched the SSET, the Sport and Event Toolkit, created by the AISTS. This is a how-to guide tool for sporting ventures that wish to apply the ISO 2012-1 standards to their organization. We also looked at the American Society for Testing and Material Standards. This standards identified specifications for environmentally sustainable evaluation and selection of venues, locations, and vendors. We continued to look more in depth at the Eco Management and Audit Scheme, the Global Reporting Initiative, also called GRI, for event organizers, and we used the ISO guide to sport, the IOC guide to sport, environment, and sustainable development. Because our main focus was more on environmental sustainability, and that's just because the scope of our project would have been just too large to dive deep into social and economic, we did focus on environment, and we wanted to look at the various resources that we were trying to protect and how and the initiatives we could put into place to protect it. and we defined three major areas: water, transport, and energy. For the water, we looked at recycling and reusing water, or clean water, using gray water or rainwater, and we also looked at how water is consumed by the spectators and by the participants. For transport, we looked at green transportation, the different methods of green transport of the animals and the spectators, and we also looked at the transport system that was used or can be used or modified during an event. So that's pre, during, and post-events. How do the spectators, participants, and the animals get to and from the venue, to the hotel, and across the globe? Finally, we looked at energy, and we looked at waste prevention initiatives. We looked at renewable energies like wind and solar energy, and we also looked at clean, efficient, green energy. We spoke to experts in the field. We spoke to Albin Poudre, Alain Jungner. These are the CEO and the Sustainability Officer for the Geneva Horse Show. We spoke to Charlie Banks. She's a consultant for Positive Impact, which is a consulting firm on sustainable initiatives. We spoke to individuals at Quantis, a life cycle assessment consulting firm that done measures on equestrian sport before. Megan will discuss this a little bit more in detail. And we spoke to Martin Adcock, who's an expert on equestrian sport and transport of horses globally. Finally, we needed to look at, one of the mandates of the team was to look at equestrian event-specific initiatives for sustainability. And we looked at energy efficient stabling, environmentally friendly stabling, using organic waste as fertilizers. We looked at feeding, the transport of the animals, and we also looked at what goes on in the field of play, how to recycle, reuse, the obstacles that are used during the event, the footing that's used during the event, and how to house these things in order to reuse for future years. I'd like to pass the floor to my colleague Meg. Thank you very much, and hope you enjoy the rest of the presentation. Bye.
Thank you, Lee. Right, so our first objective was to identify and define the major sustainability areas within equestrian sport. As Lee mentioned, we identified that waste, water, transport, and energy were the areas that were creating the biggest impact within sport. Because our target audience for our report were event organisers as well as the FEI, people that didn't know too much from a sustainability point of view, we decided instead to organise our report into 7 management topics. So these would be venue selection and venue waste, transport, stabling, competition area, catering, communication, and accommodation. And I'll discuss a little bit more about what we did with these topics in Objective 3, but right now I'll discuss Objective 2. This was to develop key performance indicators for event organisers to identify and measure. Originally, the idea was going to be to take events, measure their negative impacts on the environment, and then benchmark them against one another. We came across a couple of problems in trying to create this idea. The first was that we'd spoken to Dennis from Quantis, which is the life cycle assessment firm that Lee mentioned. And these were environmental professionals who were employed to go to organisations and go to events and really assess and measure what the negative impact was going to be for the environment. As sports management professionals, we didn't feel that we'd be able to do as sufficient a job as they were going to be able to do. And when there's companies created specifically for this, it just it felt like we weren't going to be able to accomplish this outcome. The next problem that we had was the benchmarking. In equestrian, there's 7 different disciplines, and these are 7 very different disciplines. But not only that, within each discipline, the events vary so greatly. You can have events that have 150 horses, you can have events that have 5 horses, you can have events that last for 1 day, 5 days, they can be metropolitan, they can be rural. So when it came to comparing them against one another, it just wasn't going to be possible. So what we decided instead was to utilise the Global Reporting Initiative and to really emphasise the idea of being able to measure and report their own event, and then every year go back and benchmark against how they're doing and how they're progressing. Our third objective was to create equestrian-specific sustainability guidelines. So we decided to use our research and our knowledge to create these tables. This is where we came into the 7 topics before, and that's how we devised the guidelines. And we looked at 3 event stages. So we looked at it from a post-event, a during event, a pre-event, during event, and a post-event organisational structure. The idea wasn't to enforce anything, it was just to give suggestions and really a checklist to see whether the event organisers could implement these guidelines. So I'll use the example of transport and go through and explain how we came about creating these. So creating the transport guidelines. The major implication, transport actually contributes to over 50% of the negative environmental impact for the shows, and this was confirmed by the research that Qantas had done at the Lausanne Horse Show. It's not just the transport of horses, it's also the transport of the spectators and of the infrastructure. The resources we used, we looked at environmental and travel experts, we looked at the standards that Lee mentioned, and we also did site visits to Badminton horse trials in England and Lausanne Horse Show in Lausanne. The problems that we faced when we were trying to think of a way to overcome these transport issues was really the mentalities of the horse owners. Care of the horses is imperative, and being able to transport the horses globally is something that you don't want to consolidate on. You don't want to put as many horses into a truck as possible to take them overseas. You really want to maximise the care of the horses. So what we decided was that on an international level, not too much could be done. So instead of focusing our ideas on trying to reduce horse transport, we thought about focusing more locally and into other areas to combat what was happening with the transport. So we focused on spectators and infrastructure travel, local problems, and the other impact areas. So this is our table for transport. Just to give you a bit of an example, for the FEI, we made a suggestion that instead of to create the event calendar in a more linear structure to prevent horses from travelling back and forth so that they can go from one spot to the next. The next table that I'm going to walk you through is competition area. And by this we mean the arena surfaces as well as the equipment used for the sporting. So the major implications here, again, transport of the equipment, waste production, if something's used 1 year and then just thrown away at the end of the competition, and contamination of water and wasting water when you're preparing the arena surfaces. So the resources we used were sustainability and recycling guidelines, equestrian venue guidelines. The problems we faced were that it's more of an economic. When managers are looking on how to prepare an arena and how to prepare for the competition, they're more focused on the economic point of view than they are the environmental point of view. The conclusions that we made were to source locally, to recycle everything that you can, and to plan. So this is our table, and again, it's devised in pre-event, during event, and post-event. And now I'm going to pass you on to Samesh, who's going to talk about recommendations.
Thank you, Megan. Hello, everyone. the checklists that Megan just mentioned about and showed the tables were the major chunk of our production on the project over the last 8 months. But we also realized a few major components that could be a very good addition to the implementation strategy for the sustainability initiative at FEI. And the next 5 slides I'm going to talk on that. Sorry, that was the first one, yeah. So we figured that it was paramount to create a very serious awareness about the initiative, and that could be achieved by creating a strong FEI sustainability brand. There already exists the FEI Clean Sport for the anti-doping initiatives at the FEI, and we figured that a similar FEI Green event can be the start of, or the genesis of, the sustainability brand initiative. We envision further plans to make it stronger in times to come, where it will thus be a source of pride and a lot of confidence for the event organizers to have it present on their event, all of their communication platforms, etc. It further links into another initiative I'm going to talk about. We also recommended exploring the FEI itself becoming ISO certified. There are benefits to that, and of course it's a very complex process, so there will be decisions needed to be made. But the vision is that using the ISO certifying for self, it becomes a certifier for the events in future. This is where the FEI Green Event brand links to the certification, where it is not just a brand and a logo present on the event organizer's communication and the whole process, but it is a formal certification, a sort of a seal of approval that gives a lot of credibility to the event that has been certified as an FEI Green event. The other recommendation we looked at was to partner with a global environmental organizations such as the likes of WWF, UNEP. There are others like Ecole. We are exploring those at the FEI at the moment. There's needless to say that it attaches a lot of credibility to the sustainability initiative. We have seen it happen in sports already. UNEP was, although not a big, but still a partner of the London 12 Games. WWF was involved with the Beijing Olympic Organization Committee. And apart from the credibility, there is certainly a lot of knowledge that they have which can be directly imported. We work on making it equestrian specific. Thank you, Geert. We make it equestrian specific and pass it on to the event organizers. This was also an area that we thought would be very easy to implement as well, as long as we get the event organizers buy into that, to appoint a sustainability officer, a sort of an environmental steward present at events from the organizers' staff. There are events that have happened that have done that. Lee mentioned Alain Junger, who is the sustainability officer, or was for the last few years at the CHIW, and that has reaped a lot of benefits in terms of on-ground implementation of all the initiatives that we have suggested. While the rest recommendations are still in their infancy, here is where we have prepared a fair bit in terms of the checklists, which with some further work can be passed on to potential sustainability officers. They can be the go-to person at an event and just do the top 3, 4, 5 things, and that will create a lot of impact. The last is, well, we figured during the time last, there have been many more under the strong vision of Harold now at the FEI. A sustainability dedicated website, more a portal than a website, with the usual characteristics of a website, but in addition it houses an equestrian sports specific calculator. Qantas has been developing one for events, and we would hope that it can be turned into an equestrian specific calculator with characteristics such as that how much sand has been used, so on and so forth, which usually are not there in a regular event calculator. The benchmarking that Megan mentioned can be reached through this, where one type of event can enter their readings and their resources used into these calculators and monitor it on an yearly basis or every event basis. What it also gives the FEI is a creation of a huge database that can be used to monitor the overall trend in the environmental impact initiatives. And of course it's a communication platform too. So with this, I conclude the presentation. Thank you very much for the time, and we can open up for questions now. Thank you.